The sea has no end, and no beginning, only waves that rise and fall like breaths of the world. Its surface is calm tonight, silver under the moon, but the deep carries a different story. Beneath the stillness lies a pulse, steady yet strained, as if the ocean remembers a forgotten pain. Sailors speak of Poseidon, lord of tides, master of storms, guardian of the blue expanse. To many, he is a myth, a name carried by winds. But to the sea, he is life itself. He listens when no one else does, when coral whispers and whales sing of joy or sorrow. Yet lately the voices have grown dim, their songs thin, like threads fraying at the edge. The ocean shifts, restless, uneasy, its harmony broken by something older than time. There is talk of a curse, not of fury or fire, but of silence, stealing memory from the waves. Even a god can feel powerless when the sea he rules no longer knows his name. Tonight, our story begins where silence is loudest, in the heart of Poseidon's eternal realm. It asks a question carried by the tide. Can balance be restored, or will the sea forget forever? The ocean stretched wide, endless under the soft morning light, a mirror painted in silver and gold. Waves rolled in slow rhythm, steady as a heartbeat, carrying whispers from places unseen and unknown. Above, gulls circled in spirals, their cries sharp yet distant, guardians of the sky watching the sea. For mortals sailing on its skin, the water seemed calm, a friend that promised safe passage home. But for Poseidon, the god who breathed with the tides, the silence beneath was harder to ignore. He felt the sea as others feel their veins, each current a vessel, each ripple a word in conversation. Today, the pulse of the water shifted, faintly trembling, like a song played on strings out of tune. The corals in their hidden gardens glowed less brightly, their colors softening as though in shadow. The dolphins swam with less play, circling in confusion, their clicks breaking into notes of worry. Whales that once carried deep hymns of joy hummed shorter tones, like verses half remembered, incomplete. Poseidon walked the shoreline of his domain, unseen by mortals, but felt by every droplet around him. Sand shifted gently beneath his feet, carrying stories of tides that had come and tides that had gone. He looked to the horizon where sky met water, the line blurred like memory, half hidden in mist. The ocean had always been his pride, a living chorus of beauty, strength, and eternal renewal. Now he sensed imbalance, small but steady, like the weight of a stone on a perfectly balanced scale. Gods are not strangers to silence, yet this silence pressed heavy, a quiet that drowned rather than calmed. He reached out with thought, and the sea replied in fragments, as if words were slipping between cracks. Schools of fish moved slower, breaking patterns they once knew by instinct, forgetting the dance of survival. Above them, the currents no longer sang, their voices tangled, pulled in directions without reason or cause. Poseidon closed his eyes, hearing the hush like a song missing its refrain, familiar yet broken. He knew the ocean better than any being alive, yet here was a mystery rooted in its heart. Was it change, a natural turning of time, or was it something deeper, a wound without a name? He touched the waves with his trident, stirring them gently, not in command, but in search for truth. The water replied in ripples, carrying fragments of memory like scattered pages of an unfinished tale. He felt sorrow, soft and quiet, woven into the tide, as if the sea wept without knowing why. This was not rage, nor storm, nor rebellion, but something softer, older, hidden beneath forgotten layers. The creatures of the ocean felt it too. each one in small ways, as threads weakening in a web. Poseidon walked deeper into the surf, the water rising against him, cool yet strangely heavy on his skin. Every god knows balance, and every imbalance carries a story, a reason waiting to be revealed. He listened harder, beyond sound, into the soul of the sea where secrets rest in unspoken silence. There, faint and fragile, he heard the whisper, a promise once broken, a memory once lost, stirring awake. The calm of the morning no longer comforted him, for calm can hide unrest deeper than storms. And so the god of the sea prepared not for battle, but for understanding, for the mystery had begun. The ocean's skin glittered beneath sunlight, but beneath the surface, shadows moved with strange intention. Currents that once danced in harmony now carried whispers, thin threads of sound woven through the deep. Fish swirled in tight spirals, breaking from their usual patterns, restless as though guided by unseen hands. Seagrass bent unnaturally, swaying in currents that seemed to come from nowhere and return to nothing. Poseidon placed his hand upon the tide, listening not with ears, but with the quiet of his soul. He felt vibration, small yet steady, a murmur in the water, as though the deep itself was speaking. It was not a voice of anger, but of unease, a whisper hidden in the folds of the sea. "Do you hear it?" asked the dolphins, circling him, their sleek bodies moving in waves of hesitation. Their whistles were softer, less playful, carrying tones of question rather than songs of joy. Even the whales, mighty singers of the ocean, hummed low as if remembering something forgotten long ago. The coral gardens, usually alive with sparkle, seemed muted, their glow pale like fading embers in night. Poseidon knew this was no ordinary change of tide, but a message carried by the veins of water. He followed the whispers deeper, where the currents thickened and the sea grew colder with every measure. The whispers were not words, yet they painted pictures, broken images that flickered across his divine mind. A pearl dimmed, a shrine untended, a promise left adrift, echoing through ages like a forgotten chord. The sea, his realm, was speaking in fragments, pleading for something that even he could not yet name. He turned to the spirits of the waves, soft forms that rose from foam and sank back to spray. They bowed in silence, their eyes reflecting both sorrow and fear, as though bound by truths untold. A gull screamed overhead, its cry sharp and piercing, carrying an echo of the whispers below. Everywhere Poseidon looked, signs grew clearer. Harmony was unraveling, thread by fragile thread. Even the tides, once predictable, shifted strangely, rising too early, falling too late, breaking their rhythm. He lifted his trident, not in command, but in communion, and the sea quivered as if in reply. The whispers grew louder, no longer faint, weaving through the currents like a forgotten melody returning. They carried stories of long ago promises, of sailors who once honored the sea with song and offering. But those songs had grown quiet, replaced by silence, leaving the ocean lonely, stripped of remembrance. Poseidon's heart tightened, for he knew curses often hid not in wrath, but in neglect and forgetting. He felt it again, the weight of silence pressing, a hush that drowned instead of calmed the waters. The ocean begged, not for storms, not for power, but for memory, for voice, for care once given. Poseidon stood still, listening as every ripple told him the same. The sea was forgetting itself. The whispers wrapped around him, calling him deeper, pulling him toward a truth buried in the abyss. And so the god of the sea prepared to descend, not to rule, but to remember what was lost. Waves roll in, steady and calm. carrying whispers older than any kingdom on land. The sea has always spoken, though not in words we can easily hear. To the ancient Greeks, the ocean was alive, a vast soul with moods and memory. They believed it was ruled by Poseidon, god of the sea, storms, and hidden depths. He was not gentle nor cruel, but powerful, a force beyond mortal control. Sailors carved his name on their ships, hoping his gaze would guide them safely. Fishermen dropped coins or shells into the waves, small gifts for his blessing. Every ripple and tide was a reminder that the sea was never truly theirs. But stories tell of times when pride blinded mortals to this truth, when gratitude faded and the sound of prayers grew silent on the shore. In those moments, the ocean changed, calm waters shifting into restless tides. Not out of anger, but out of memory. The sea reclaimed what was forgotten. Tonight, we travel into such a tale, a legend called the Ocean's Curse, a story where Poseidon's silence became louder than thunder, and where humans learned that respect for the sea is the price of its gift. Poseidon was born of the Titans, child of Cronus and Rhea, brother to Zeus and Hades. From the beginning, his spirit was tied to the sea, restless and unending. When the cosmos was divided, Zeus took the skies, Hades the underworld, and Poseidon the waters. He received a trident, a gift of power forged by the Cyclopes, sharp as lightning. With one strike, he could raise mountains of waves or calm the quietest tide. The sea was his realm, but not merely a kingdom of water and salt. It was a world of secrets, teeming with unseen life and hidden wonders. Beneath the waves, Poseidon built palaces of coral and pearl, dazzling to behold. Columns of shell and chambers of crystal shimmered in endless blue light. Mermaids, dolphins, and sea spirits moved freely in his company, singing to the tides. He was not always present, for gods walked many paths. Yet the ocean carried his breath. Every swell, every current, bore his rhythm like a heartbeat across the world. To mortals, Poseidon was both protector and peril, for the sea was never gentle. One day it gave fish in abundance, the next it swallowed ships whole. No captain set sail without a silent glance toward his name. No fisherman cast his net without fearing what might answer below. For Poseidon's trident was not only a symbol, but a reminder of balance. Power could create, but power could also undo with a flick of the wrist. Legends tell that when he struck the earth, springs of water burst forth. From barren ground came fountains, rivers, and cool streams to quench thirst. Yet with the same hand, he could shake mountains and crack open valleys. Such was the paradox of the god of the sea. Generous, yet unyielding. Sailors believed his moods reflected the hearts of men upon the waves. If they sailed with pride, storms rose, winds howled, and lightning split the sky. If they sailed with reverence, breezes steadied their sails up and carried them home. Temples lined the shores of Greece, where incense burned in his honor. Statues of marble rose high, tridents gleaming, eyes fixed upon the horizon. Priests offered bulls and wine, seeking blessings for journeys across distant seas. But Poseidon required no grandeur. Even seashells whispered into the tide were enough. Children tossed flowers into the surf, trusting their innocence to touch the god. Every culture that faced the sea gave him a name, a face, a story. For who could live beside the endless horizon and not see divinity within it? And so Poseidon's fame stretched far, not only across Greece, but beyond. He was the roar of surf on rocky cliffs, the hush of waves on sand. He was the sudden calm that lured ships deeper, and the storm that sent them back. To speak of Poseidon was to speak of the sea itself. never fully known, never fully tamed, yet always demanding awe. Ancient sailors carried small idols of him, carved from bone or wood. They placed them at the bow of their vessels, facing the waves ahead. Some kissed the figure before departure, murmuring words of hope and fear. For each voyage was a prayer, each return a gift from the sea god. And though Poseidon dwelled far beneath the waters, he was never distant. For every tide that rose and fell was his hand brushing the earth. Every storm cloud that gathered on the horizon was his breath on the wind. The ancients knew this truth well. Poseidon was everywhere, always watching. And in that knowledge, respect was born, a respect that carried across centuries. For without him, the ocean was an empty mystery, but with him, it lived. Thus begins the tale of Poseidon, god of the waters, master of the tides, a god whose power shaped not only the seas, but the very hearts of humankind. The ocean was more than waves and foam, more than storms that rose and fell without warning. It was a cradle of life, a place where the first sparks of creation seemed to breathe. To the ancient Greeks, the sea was both provider and mystery, generous yet untamed. Fishermen cast their nets into its depths, drawing up silver shoals glimmering in the sun. Pearls, shells, and sponges surfaced from the seabed, treasures carried to distant markets. Trade routes opened across the waters, carrying spices, fabrics, and stories from far lands. Every boat that drifted upon the horizon was part of the ocean's endless gift. Without Poseidon's domain, no city could thrive, no people could reach beyond their shores. The Greeks knew this well and gave thanks, for the sea was the lifeblood of their world. They built harbors that curved like open arms, ready to welcome the tide's return. Markets filled with salt, fish, and coral, each a reminder of Poseidon's generosity. Children played on beaches, chasing the foam, their laughter echoing across the coast. Mothers told them to thank the sea, to bow their heads before its might. The ocean was a highway, a pathway to places unseen, linking cultures and kingdoms. Sailors returned with tales of islands rich with fruit and skies unlike their own. Every story was woven with the sea, for no journey existed without its embrace. Poseidon was at the heart of it, unseen yet always present in every current. The fishermen prayed not for wealth, but for safe winds to bring them home. For no treasure was greater than a safe return, no gift sweeter than reunion. Sailors offered olive oil poured gently into the surf, calming restless waves. Small shrines stood at harbors, where travelers lit lamps before departing. A coin cast into the water was not a loss, but a pact with the sea. Merchants knew that Poseidon's favor was worth more than all their wares combined. For one calm voyage could change a family's fate, feeding generations yet to come. The sea also gave beauty that needed no measure of trade or value. Sunsets painted gold upon the waves, mornings wrapped in mists like woven silk. The sound of water lapping against stone lulled the weary into quiet dreams. Poets sang of Poseidon's gift, verses carried like birdsong across the agora. Artists carved dolphins leaping from marble, a celebration of life beneath the waves. Every part of Greek culture was touched by the ocean's presence, like breath itself. Poseidon's realm stretched far beyond human sight, yet close enough to shape daily life. Without his waters, fields would dry, ships would rot, and songs would fade. The sea was the great equalizer, humbling kings and lifting the poor alike. For it did not choose its gifts based on power, only on respect and chance. Those who honored Poseidon found balance. Those who ignored him faced uncertainty. But in these days of reverence, the ocean gave freely, endlessly, without hesitation. Villages grew into cities, and cities grew into ports, each tied to the sea. From Athens to Corinth, harbors flourished, their wealth glistening like morning dew. Yet all prosperity traced back to the waves, the endless rhythm of tide and moon. The people sang to Poseidon, not only as god, but as guardian of their lives. And though they feared his storms, they loved his gifts even more. Every dawn upon the shore was a reminder. The ocean was generous, but never owned. The Greeks understood that the gifts of the sea were not theirs by right. They were borrowed, entrusted, blessings to be met with gratitude and care. And so, Poseidon's power was not only feared, but deeply cherished. For without his ocean, the world would be silent, empty, and still. But with it, life surged, trade thrived, and stories sailed across the horizon. This was the ocean's gift, the great offering of Poseidon, Lord of the Sea. In a coastal town where cliffs met the restless waves, prosperity shimmered like sunlight on water. The people thrived on trade, fishing, and the endless bounty of the ocean's hand. Ships came and went, carrying goods, wealth, and tales of distant lands to their harbors. Markets bloomed with spices, fabrics, pearls, and salted fish, treasures laid out in abundance. The town grew proud, its leaders walking tall, believing fortune was theirs to command. They praised their own wisdom, their skill in building ships, their mastery over trade. The sea, once a partner in life, began to feel like a servant to their will. Prayers to Poseidon grew fewer, offerings smaller, temples quieter with each passing season. Some whispered that the god was distant now, too far to notice their neglect. Others claimed that their own hands, not divine favor, carved their success from the waves. In council halls, the leaders spoke with pride, boasting of ships that conquered horizons. They said, "The ocean bends to us. Our sails carry the winds, our nets rule the depths." Merchants echoed these words, believing profit was born from cleverness, not from Poseidon's gift. Children grew up hearing less of the sea god and more of human triumph. The old sailors frowned, remembering storms that rose when respect was forgotten. But their warnings were met with laughter, called relics of a superstitious age. The town's festivals once honored Poseidon with music, feasts, and offerings to the tide. Now those rituals were shortened, replaced with celebrations of wealth and victory at sea. Statues of the god stood in silence, offerings of seashells left to gather dust. In the heart of the harbor, a great ship was built, larger than any before. The leaders declared it the pride of the town, proof of their mastery over the ocean. They named it not after Poseidon, but after themselves, a monument to mortal pride. Crowds cheered, banners flew, and horns sounded as the vessel touched the water. But the waves lapped against its hull with a strange rhythm, as if uneasy. Some fishermen muttered that the sea did not welcome the ship, but none listened. Wealth blinded the people, pride filled their voices, and gratitude slipped quietly away. The sea, once greeted with reverence, was now treated as a tool to be used. Poseidon's name, once spoken daily, faded from songs and vanished from prayers. The god was not angered, but the ocean remembered, for the sea does not forget. Balance was shifting, unseen by those who basked in their fleeting triumph. A whisper moved across the waves, a silence that carried more weight than thunder. The tides began to stir strangely, not violent, but restless, as if waiting. Fishermen noticed their nets grew lighter, the fish scarcer, the waters thinner with life. Yet when they spoke of it, the council dismissed their words as fear. They said the sea was endless, eternal, incapable of withholding its riches. But in their hearts, some felt unease, a shadow behind the shimmer of wealth. The town, once humble before the ocean, now stood proudly, blind to the change. And so the whisper of discontent began, soft as foam, steady as the tide. It was not born of wrath, but of memory. For the sea holds every story. The story of a god forgotten, of gratitude fading, of balance tilting in silence. And though the waves still kissed the shore, they carried a warning within their touch. For no harbor, no ship, no city can claim the sea as its own. The ocean had given freely, but now it waited, patient, watchful, remembering. This was the whisper of discontent, the first stirring of the ocean's curse. The great festival came with banners, music, and the smell of roasted food filling the streets. Merchants decorated stalls, children danced, and the harbor shone with lanterns of every color. It was a time of joy, a tradition older than memory, a gift of gratitude. For generations, the festival had honored Poseidon, thanking him for calm seas and rich harvests. Offerings of fruit, wine, and fish were cast into the waves as sacred tribute. Priests led processions, voices rising in hymns that blended with the sound of the tide. Families knelt on the shore, whispering prayers to the god of the deep. The sea always seemed to answer, its waves shimmering with quiet approval. But this year was different, and the change was not spoken aloud. The council had decided the festival should no longer dwell on old traditions. They wished to celebrate the town itself, its achievements, and its growing strength. The festival became a tribute to men, not gods, and pride filled the air. Musicians played songs of conquest, not hymns, and the temples stood strangely quiet. The priests, troubled, asked when the offerings would be made to the sea. The council replied, "Not this year. The ocean will not miss a few prayers." Some elders gasped, for never before had Poseidon been left without honor. Yet their voices were drowned by laughter, music, and the clinking of wine cups. Children ran along the shore, but no shells or flowers were cast into the tide. Fishermen stood uneasy, their hands gripping nets, feeling the sea grow heavier with silence. The temple's steps, once crowded, were empty, its altars cold and bare. The statue of Poseidon seemed to watch with stone eyes, unmoving but full of a weight. Night fell and the festival roared louder, a sea of firelight and human pride. Dancers spun through the streets, torches blazing, but none lit lamps for the sea god. The harbor was alive with noise, yet the ocean lay still, dark and listening. No wind stirred the sails of ships, no wave lapped against the stone piers. The silence was strange, unnatural, as though the sea had withdrawn its breath. A few sailors whispered among themselves, remembering tales of forgotten offerings. They said that when gods are ignored, the balance of sea and land shifts. But no one else listened, their voices drowned in music, feasting, and merriment. Even the children, once taught to thank the sea, now knew only laughter. As the night deepened, the moon rose pale over the waters, casting silver light. The waves reflected no joy, only a cold stillness that unsettled the few who watched. The festival carried on, blind to the silence, drunk on its own pride. No prayers were spoken, no gifts were offered, no voices sang to Poseidon. For the first time in living memory, the ocean received nothing from the town. The priests sat in the temple, staring at empty altars, whispering their own quiet prayers. They knew the sea was not merely water, but memory, balance, and divine presence. And they feared what silence from the people might awaken beneath the waves. The next morning, the festival ended, the streets littered with banners, ashes, and laughter. The people congratulated themselves on their success, proud of their mortal triumph. But when they turned their eyes to the sea, they saw it still and heavy. The horizon lay gray and empty, as though watching them with quiet disapproval. The fishermen shivered, for their nets felt lighter, their boats strangely harder to row. They muttered among themselves that Poseidon had been forgotten, and the sea remembered. But the leaders dismissed it, saying, "The ocean will always provide. It knows no pride." Still, unease lingered in the air, a tension between shore and tide. The people had celebrated themselves, but the silence of the sea was the truest sound. A forgotten offering, a neglected god, and the first shadow of a curse began. The morning sun rose bright, but the sea remained dim, its waters heavy with quiet weight. Boats left the harbor as always, sails wide and nets ready, chasing the promise of fish. The fishermen hummed old tunes, though their voices trembled as they looked toward the horizon. The ocean, usually alive with silver flashes, now stretched out gray and strangely barren. Hours passed, nets were drawn, but they came back nearly empty, tangled with seaweed. The men exchanged uneasy glances, for never had the waters been so stingy. In the markets, women waited, baskets ready, but fishmongers returned with almost nothing. The air grew tense, whispers passing quickly from stall to stall across the town square. Some said the fish had moved, some blamed storms far away, some blamed careless hands. But the elders shook their heads, saying softly that the sea was never random. At night, the fishermen gathered by lantern light, voices low, remembering the forgotten rites. One said, "The god has been left without offering, and the ocean has closed its hand." Another shook his head, insisting it was only bad luck, a shift of the seasons. Yet none could ignore the hunger growing in their homes, the slow fading of abundance. Children asked for fish stew, but mothers offered bread instead, hearts heavy with worry. The taverns, once loud with sailors' laughter, grew quiet, their mugs half empty, their eyes distant. Stories began to spread, tales of shadows beneath the waves, too large to be whales. One boy swore he saw a figure rise at dusk, then vanish into the mist. His words were dismissed with laughter, but the fear behind the laughter lingered. On the cliffside, the priests watched the tide, their robes stirring in the salt wind. They whispered prayers, though no one came to join them, the altars still bare. One priest said, "The sea remembers. It always remembers. And silence is not forgiveness." The others nodded, their faces pale, for they too had seen the horizon darken. Ships that once sailed far now hugged the coast, unwilling to face the open deep. The sea no longer felt like a friend. It was a mirror, cold and stern. Merchants grumbled, trade slowed, and rumors spread of villages beyond suffering the same. The council dismissed the fears, saying, "Our people are strong. We are not bound by old myths." But their voices were strained, for they too saw their tables with fewer dishes each night. In the harbor, seagulls circled less, their cries thin and restless, wings beating over still waters. The ocean gave no bounty, yet it did not storm, only waited in silence. Fishermen tossed coins secretly into the tide, ashamed but desperate for Poseidon's mercy. One knelt, whispering, "Lord of the deep, forgive us. We did not mean to forget." The waves rolled back, without answer, steady but cold, as if listening without reply. The children grew restless, asking why the sea no longer sparkled with life. Mothers told them stories of Poseidon, though their voices carried both reverence and fear. The nights became uneasy, the sound of the tide louder, closer, heavy with warning. The people began to feel watched, as though the ocean itself had eyes. Fishermen dreamed of storms, of voices rising from the deep, calling them by name. They woke with salt on their lips, though they had not sailed that night. The priests urged the council once more. Make the offering, restore the festival, before it is too late. But the council waved them away, proud men unwilling to bow to what they could not see. Yet in their hearts, unease grew, like a shadow stretching from the shore. The sea gave no storm, no rage, only silence, and silence was more frightening still. For silence meant waiting, and waiting meant judgment yet to come. And in that waiting, the ocean's curse was slowly taking form. The days grew longer, but the town felt smaller, as though pressed in by the weight of the sea. Merchants worried, for ships no longer came as often, fearing the barren waters of the coast. The marketplace echoed with fewer voices, baskets of grain replacing what once was fresh fish. Children asked where the great catches had gone, their small hands tugging at tired sleeves. Mothers hushed them, offering bread and olives, though their eyes drifted toward the harbor. The council met in the great hall, their voices sharp, echoing off stone walls. They spoke of trade routes, of expanding farmland, of ignoring the whispers of old myths. One elder rose, his beard white with age, his voice trembling but steady. He said, "The sea is not silent without reason. It remembers what we have forgotten." But the council scoffed, saying his words were relics, not guidance for the present. Outside, the priests stood waiting, robes pale, their eyes fixed on the restless horizon. They no longer asked permission to act. They prayed aloud, voices rising to the wind. Their chants were old, sacred, carved into memory long before the council's pride. But few joined them, for most townsfolk feared the council's anger more than the sea's silence. At dusk, the fishermen prepared to sail, their boats creaking, sails patched with care. They rowed cautiously, whispering songs of supplication, hoping Poseidon still listened. The waters opened before them, wide and endless, but lifeless as a desert plain. They cast their nets again and again, but nothing stirred within the deep. One man leaned over the side, swearing he saw eyes watching from below. Not fish eyes, not whale eyes, but something vast, ancient, and unblinking. He pulled back in terror, yet said nothing, fearing the laughter of his comrades. That night, as the boats returned, the harbor was eerily quiet, the sea calm as glass. The people gathered, but their faces fell when they saw the empty nets. Children clutched their mothers, whispering that the sea was angry, that the god had turned away. The priests bowed their heads, for they knew the children spoke closer to truth than counsel. Still, the leaders declared it was chance, urging people to remain strong and hopeful. But in the taverns, whispers grew louder, tales of curses and omens filling the air. One sailor claimed he dreamed of a trident rising from the depths, glowing with stormlight. Another swore he heard the sea speak, though its voice was thunder without words. The people laughed nervously, but laughter no longer carried joy, only fear's disguise. The nights stretched long, the tide louder, as though it crept closer with every hour. Windows rattled in the windless dark, and dogs barked at nothing near the shore. The priests climbed the cliffs, lighting torches, sending their glow across the black waves. They prayed until their voices broke, but the sea gave no sign, no ripple, no song. The elders warned the council once more, their voices heavy with sorrow. They begged for the festival to return, for offerings to be made before the silence deepened. But pride is a wall higher than stone, and the council would not bend. Instead, they declared new celebrations, feasts of men, praising only their strength and will. No shells, no flowers, no coins touched the water, only shadows stretching longer each night. The sea gave no storm, no blessing, only silence thicker than any gale. And silence grew heavy, pressing into dreams, into breath, into the marrow of the town. Children woke crying, saying they heard voices in the tide calling them by name. Fishermen dreamed of waves rising high, though dawn showed only still water. The people began to feel trapped, as though the land itself leaned toward the ocean. Forgetting the god had not freed them, it had chained them to his waiting gaze. And in that waiting, the ocean's curse sank deeper, unseen but certain. The town lived, but each day felt borrowed, each night stretched with dread. For silence had become the sea's answer, and silence is never empty. The seventh night came with no wind, no clouds, and no stars above the quiet sea. The harbor lanterns flickered, their flames struggling though no breeze touched the shore. The townsfolk gathered uneasily, their voices hushed, eyes glancing often toward the horizon. They had grown used to silence, yet this silence felt heavier, sharper, almost alive. Children clung to their mothers, whispering that they heard footsteps in the waves. Elders sat with bowed heads, muttering prayers they once spoke proudly in daylight. The priests lit incense on the cliffs, their chants trembling against the unmoving tide. They spoke the god's name, Poseidon, begging his mercy, but no answer came. Down by the harbor, fishermen sharpened their oars and mended their nets. They were restless, unable to sit in stillness, afraid of what stillness meant. One sailor said, "The sea is watching, and it waits for us to speak." Another replied, "The sea has spoken already. We are the ones who ignored it." Their words carried far in the night, for even whispers seemed loud against the quiet. The council refused to join them, feasting instead in their stone hall with loud voices. They toasted to resilience, claiming the sea's silence was nothing but a passing season. But their laughter was brittle, their eyes shifting often to the windows. The fishermen felt the truth in their bones, truth older than any council decree. The sea was patient, but patience could be as dangerous as wrath. At midnight, the tide swelled higher than usual, though no storm clouds stirred the sky. The waves reached the steps of the temple, lapping at the stone like fingers. The priests fell to their knees, chanting, their voices cracking in desperation. Still, the ocean gave no thunder, no lightning, no roar, only quiet rising water. The townsfolk gasped, clutching each other as the waves receded without a sound. Not a drop lingered, though the stones glistened as though kissed by unseen hands. Children began to cry, for they swore they heard voices whisper their names. Fishermen clenched their fists, muttering of curses, of debts unpaid to the sea. An old woman spoke aloud. "This is not anger. This is remembrance. We are forgotten." Her words chilled the crowd, for they carried the weight of prophecy. The next morning, the sea appeared calm, but the fishermen refused to launch their boats. Their nets hung limp on the docks, their hands too heavy with dread to work. Markets stood half empty, bread and grain replacing the ocean's absent gifts. The council scolded them, demanding they sail, but fear outweighed hunger in their hearts. That evening, the priests gathered the people by torchlight near the temple steps. They told stories of Poseidon, of ancient covenants between sea and land. They said, respect is the price of balance. Without it, the sea takes back its gifts. The people listened, torn between fear of the god and fear of their leaders. Some whispered they should rebuild the festival, offer wine, fruit, and prayer once more. Others feared it was too late, that silence had already sealed their fate. The children's eyes shone wide, sensing truths their parents tried to ignore. That night, dreams came heavy to the town, dreams of waves without end. Some dreamed of tridents rising, glowing with deep blue fire beneath the water. Others dreamed of storms circling, though dawn revealed only an unmoving sea. A fisherman woke screaming, swearing he felt salt filling his lungs, though he lay in bed. His neighbors comforted him, but in their eyes burned the same silent fear. The council pretended not to hear, but whispers of curses grew louder in the taverns. The priests warned, "The sea waits, but it will not wait forever." The people trembled at the thought, knowing the silence was not peace. The silence was a question, waiting for an answer they had not given. And in that unanswered question, the ocean's curse deepened, unseen but inevitable. The eighth dawn rose pale, casting a silver light across the restless sea and weary town. The fishermen stood at the shore, staring at the horizon with nets unused and boats tied fast. The women carried water jars, their steps slower than usual, their voices muted with worry. The children played quietly, their laughter softened as though afraid to disturb the air. The council gathered again in the stone hall, their words sharp and loud. They argued about trade, taxes, and pride, pretending the silence of the sea was unimportant. But outside, the priests whispered warnings that grew heavier with each rising tide. They claimed Poseidon's eyes were upon them, measuring their devotion and their neglect. The people listened, torn between obedience and defiance, unsure which path led to safety. One night, the harbor lit with torches. A secret gathering formed by the fishermen. They stood in a circle, hands rough and voices low, speaking of forgotten rituals. An elder recalled the festival of waves, once held with music, wine, and offerings. He said the people had abandoned it, believing themselves free from the gods' gaze. The younger men asked what would happen if they revived it now. The elder sighed, saying, "The sea does not forget, but perhaps it forgives." Their decision spread quietly, house to house, until many hearts leaned toward the idea. Mothers prepared baskets of fruit, olives, and bread, their hands trembling with purpose. Children practiced songs once sung at the festival, though their voices quavered with fear. The priests saw the preparations and nodded, saying, "It is not too late, but time runs thin." The council grew angry when they heard, declaring the people weak and superstitious. They forbade the festival, threatening punishment for disobedience. But in the hearts of the townsfolk, the silence of the sea weighed heavier than threats. The fishermen, brave and stubborn, declared they would honor the sea regardless. On the next moonlit night, they carried offerings to the cliffs above the water. They poured wine into the waves, scattered grain, and lowered baskets on ropes. The sea remained silent, but the tide rose gently to meet their gifts. Some swore they saw light shimmering beneath the water, like eyes opening in the deep. Others claimed they heard a low hum, softer than thunder, older than the wind. The children felt quiet, clutching their mothers, sensing something vast and listening. The priests raised their arms, chanting hymns in voices cracked by years of silence. Still no storm came, no voice thundered, no answer echoed in the air. The people felt both relief and dread, uncertain if they had pleased or angered the sea. The next day, the waters glittered, strangely, reflecting colors no one had ever seen. Fishermen touched the surface with their oars, and the water rippled with warmth. One whispered, "It feels alive, as if it breathes beneath our hands." The council mocked them, declaring it was nothing but tricks of light. But the people no longer trusted the council, for their fear was stronger than their pride. At night, dreams grew stranger and heavier across the town. Some dreamed of walking on the ocean floor, surrounded by glowing coral and silent fish. Others dreamed of tridents resting in their hands, too heavy to lift. One child dreamed of a voice whispering, "Remember the covenant. Restore what was broken." When the child woke, they repeated the words, and the town fell into uneasy silence. The priests believed it was a sign, a message sent from the deep. The people gathered again, preparing a greater offering, something more than bread and wine. They spoke of statues, music, dance, and firelight, a festival worthy of memory. But in their hearts, they wondered if Poseidon's silence meant waiting or warning. The sea glittered at dawn, calm and endless, but no one felt peace. They had begun to awaken an old bond, and with it, an old fear. For the ocean's curse was not only silence, it was the reminder of forgotten promises. And promises broken to the sea were not easily mended. The ninth night fell with a moon, bright as silver, casting shadows deep across the quiet town. The fishermen gathered by the harbor, their eyes set upon the horizon like watchers of fate. The women stood behind them, carrying baskets of fruit, herbs, and small tokens for offerings. Children clutched torches, their flames flickering in the salt-stained wind of the shore. The priests walked among them, cloaked in white, whispering prayers to guide their steps. They spoke of humility, reminding the people that pride once broke their covenant. The council, stern and angry, tried to block the gathering, declaring it rebellion. But the people pressed forward, fear heavier than law, faith stronger than decree. The sea stretched wide and dark, calm yet full of unspoken weight. They carried their gifts to the cliffs, placing baskets upon the stones where waves kissed. Wine poured into the tide, red ribbons curling through the silver water. Bread and fruit drifted away, carried gently as if by unseen hands. The priests raised their voices, hymns trembling, rising higher with each echo of the tide. The townsfolk joined, singing melodies half forgotten yet carved deep in their blood. The sound filled the night, fragile yet steady like stars trembling against a void. Then the sea stirred, not with storm, not with fury, but with soft, trembling waves. A glow rose from beneath, faint at first, then brighter, like dawn within the ocean. The children gasped, pointing to shapes moving below, shadows too vast to be fish. The fishermen stood firm, though their hands shook, knowing the god was near. The glow spread across the surface, outlining waves in lines of blue fire. The priests cried out, declaring this a sign, a moment of judgment and remembrance. The people fell silent, waiting, every heartbeat sounding louder than the ocean itself. From the depths came a hum, steady, low, older than any word. It vibrated through the stones, through their bones, through the air itself. Some fell to their knees, hands pressed to the earth, unable to bear the weight. Others stared wide-eyed, torn between awe and terror, unsure if it was blessing or curse. The councilmen shouted, calling it trickery, their voices drowned in the humming. The fishermen ignored them, stepping closer to the cliffs, offerings in hand. They threw nets filled with shells, coral, and crafted charms into the glowing sea. The water accepted them, closing with soft ripples as if swallowing prayers. The glow pulsed once, brighter than fire, then slowly faded into darkness. Silence fell again, heavier than before, thick as the depths of the ocean. The people did not move, afraid to break the stillness with words or breath. Finally, the priests whispered, "The god is heard." But judgment is not yet given. The crowd dispersed slowly, steps heavy, as though carrying stones in their chests. That night, sleep brought visions more vivid than dreams, shared by all. Some saw the sea split open, revealing cities of coral and towers of pearl. Others saw the god himself, vast and crowned, his trident casting shadows over land. Children dreamed of singing waves, calling them to step barefoot into the deep. The priests dreamed of silence breaking, a voice rising to demand an answer. When dawn came, the town woke restless, bound by the same unspoken vision. The fishermen refused to sail, claiming the sea was no longer the same. The council grew angrier, declaring famine would come if nets stayed dry. But the people stood firm, believing hunger safer than the gods' forgotten wrath. On the 10th dawn, the ocean glimmered strangely, calm but waiting, like a closed eye. The priests declared, "The sea has spoken in silence, and its silence is command." The people shivered, for they knew the ocean's curse had deepened once more. And in that silence, they sensed Poseidon's hand was not far but near. The 9th night fell with a moon bright as silver, casting shadows deep across the quiet town. The fishermen gathered by the harbor, their eyes set upon the horizon like watchers of fate. The women stood behind them, carrying baskets of fruit, herbs, and small tokens for offerings. Children clutched torches, their flames flickering in the salt-stained wind of the shore. The priests walked among them, cloaked in white, whispering prayers to guide their steps. They spoke of humility, reminding the people that pride once broke their covenant. The council, stern and angry, tried to block the gathering, declaring it rebellion. But the people pressed forward, fear heavier than law, faith stronger than decree. The sea stretched wide and dark, calm yet full of unspoken weight. They carried their gifts to the cliffs, placing baskets upon the stones where waves kissed. Wine poured into the tide, red ribbons curling through the silver water. Bread and fruit drifted away, carried gently as if by unseen hands. The priests raised their voices, hymns trembling, rising higher with each echo of the tide. The townsfolk joined, singing melodies half forgotten yet carved deep in their blood. The sound filled the night, fragile yet steady like stars trembling against a void. Then the sea stirred, not with storm, not with fury, but with soft, trembling waves. A glow rose from beneath, faint at first, then brighter, like dawn within the ocean. The children gasped, pointing to shapes moving below, shadows too vast to be fish. The fishermen stood firm, though their hands shook, knowing the god was near. The glow spread across the surface, outlining waves in lines of blue fire. The priests cried out, declaring this a sign, a moment of judgment and remembrance. The people fell silent, waiting, every heartbeat sounding louder than the ocean itself. From the depths came a hum, steady, low, older than any word. It vibrated through the stones, through their bones, through the air itself. Some fell to their knees, hands pressed to the earth, unable to bear the weight. Others stared wide-eyed, torn between awe and terror, unsure if it was blessing or curse. The councilmen shouted, calling it trickery, their voices drowned in the humming. The fishermen ignored them, stepping closer to the cliffs, offerings in hand. They threw nets filled with shells, coral, and crafted charms into the glowing sea. The water accepted them, closing with soft ripples, as if swallowing prayers. The glow pulsed once, brighter than fire, then slowly faded into darkness. Silence fell again, heavier than before, thick as the depths of the ocean. The people did not move, afraid to break the stillness with words or breath. Finally, the priests whispered, "The god has heard, but judgment is not yet given." The crowd dispersed slowly, steps heavy as though carrying stones in their chests. That night, sleep brought visions more vivid than dreams, shared by all. Some saw the sea split open, revealing cities of coral and towers of pearl. Others saw the god himself, vast and crowned, his trident casting shadows over land. Children dreamed of singing waves, calling them to step barefoot into the deep. The priests dreamed of silence breaking, a voice rising to demand an answer. When dawn came, the town woke restless, bound by the same unspoken vision. The fishermen refused to sail, claiming the sea was no longer the same. The council grew angrier, declaring famine would come if nets stayed dry. But the people stood firm, believing hunger safer than the gods' forgotten wrath. On the 10th dawn, the ocean glimmered strangely, calm but waiting, like a closed eye. The priests declared, "The sea has spoken in silence, and its silence is command." The people shivered, for they knew the ocean's curse had deepened once more. And in that silence, they sensed Poseidon's hand was not far, but near. The final night arrived, heavy with silence, and the people gathered by the shore beneath a silver moon. Torches blazed along the sand, their flames trembling as if they too felt the weight of unseen eyes. The festival of waves began, a ceremony born not from joy alone, but from fear and reverence combined. Fishermen carried nets filled with pearls and coral, gifts torn from the sea and now returned in humility. Women placed garlands of flowers upon the water, petals drifting like fragile prayers across the tide. Children sang hymns, their voices weaving with the wind, fragile yet clear as crystal notes. The priests raised their arms, chanting words older than memory, summoning the forgotten covenant once more. The crowd bowed low, faces pressed to sand, as the sea began to stir with an ancient rhythm. Waves rose higher, not wild but purposeful, as though something vast moved beneath their surface. A glow emerged, faint and growing, shimmering deep within the heart of the waters. The people gasped, their breath caught between awe and dread, for they knew the god was near. Then came the voice, not thunder, not storm, but a resonance that shook the soul. "Children of the shore," it spoke, "you turned from me, and so the sea turned from you." The people trembled, yet no one fled, for they knew this was the moment of reckoning. Poseidon's presence filled the night, unseen yet undeniable, a tide of power pressing against every heart. He spoke again. The ocean's curse was not wrath, but memory. Forgotten promises returned to demand truth. The priests wept, for the meaning was clear. This was no punishment, but a call to restore balance. An old man rose, voice steady, declaring, "Great Lord, we return to you, not with fear, but with devotion." One by one, the people lifted their voices, pledging to honor the sea as kin, not as slave. The fishermen vowed to fish with care, taking only what the ocean allowed. The mothers promised to teach their children the old songs, never to let memory fade again. The priests swore to guard the covenant, not for power, but for harmony with the deep. Silence fell, broken only by the steady crash of waves against the shore. Then the glow brightened, spilling across the water, painting the sea in colors of dawn. The voice of Poseidon softened, no longer stern, but deep with ancient sorrow. "Then let the bond be restored, and may the tides carry your truth into eternity." The sea surged forward, not in rage but in blessing, washing over the people's feet. Salt water kissed the sand, leaving behind shells that shimmered like stars. Children bent to collect, them laughing through tears, their fear melted into wonder. The priests declared the curse lifted, the covenant renewed, the silence finally broken. The people embraced, joy rising like sunlight after endless storm. Above them, the moon seemed to glow brighter, as though bearing witness to the vow. The waves calmed, steady and eternal, carrying the rhythm of promise through the night. The festival of waves ended not in fear, but in peace, a memory reborn. And from that night forward, the people lived with the sea, not against it. They fished with reverence, celebrated the tides, and honored the god with every breath. Generations passed, yet the story endured, told by firelight and then whispered to children at dusk. The ocean's curse was no longer dread, but a tale of warning, of balance, of respect. For in the end, it was not fear that saved them, but memory restored and promises kept. And so the sea remained their guardian, their mirror, their eternal companion beneath the stars. The waves whispered still, carrying the voice of Poseidon, calm yet mighty, a reminder forever. And the people listened, not in silence, but in harmony, hearts beating with the rhythm of the tide.